keeping information and I'll just say that it's all algorithm based. So the things that they like, they're getting served on a daily basis. They spend upwards of 2.5 hours every day on social media, and that's on average. That's including my old ass. Like we're, you know, when you talk about Gen Z, that could be easily 7 hours a day. So as we prepare for this next generation, as we figure out how to connect with them from an educational standpoint, I think it's really important to think about this as a positive and not a negative, because it is inescapable and it is an absolute tool as we'll talk about moving forward in this conversation.
Thank you, Josh. Lee?
Yeah, look, Josh, why don't you introduce yourself too?
Well, he's up there. I'm Josh Ott. I'm the head of revenue for the Shade Room, which is who here knows the Shade Room? Okay. It is the world's #1 social media platform by both actions and scale. So huge presence. It authentically comes from the Black experience and the Black voice, which, as we know, is both America's experience and America's voice, and arguably the fuel for global consumption. So that's what I do.
Well, preparing for this, I learned new things. Lee Maxey, and I'm CEO of a company called MindMax, and we help colleges and universities with their enrollments. So we work with them on their marketing, work with them on their recruitment practices for both undergrad and grad programs. Average age of an undergrad. What's your guess of an average age of an undergrad? 25.
Yeah.
Okay, so this room and this conference, I know, is focused on that emerging teenager. Not the emerging teenagers, but the teenagers who are verging into college. And so colleges are looking at the population that's coming to their campuses and to their programs in a lot different way than, I'll call it, your view to college. And so they're thinking about all of their students, not just the incoming 18 or 19-year-olds. And I love this one because one of the things that I work with people in college, and people tend to use what they know how to use, which is colleges are not going out into a lot of these social platforms. They're just not. They're using LinkedIn, they're using Facebook, they're using Instagram, they're starting to use TikTok. And they're, quite frankly, we work with a lot of marketing departments, they're terrified of this. They're really afraid of it. And it's just an interesting dynamic to watch how schools are going to be connecting with prospective students. Schools are also not just trying to connect with the prospective students. They're trying to connect with families, and they're trying to connect with counselors, teachers, people that are functioning as college coaches, and others in the industry that are supporting kids going to college. So they're trying to connect in a lot of different channels. But from the perspective of the graduate programs, and Josh and I talked about it, LinkedIn is by far the strongest connection point from a graduate program. It's also one of the most expensive to advertise. But it is, Facebook is like the worst. It's the greatest place to get leads, but they're not necessarily leads that are strong leads that are likely to move to a grad program. But in relationship to working with I'll call it 17, 18, 19-year-olds who are looking to go to first-time freshmen, I think schools have a long way to go. I think there's a little bit of a gap between what schools are trying to do to connect and what the college searchers are.
That's a great overview and baseline for what we'll do, right? So in the previous session, Porter talked about meeting people where they are, right? So at the colleges, they know where they need to be, but they're not, right? Students, they might not necessarily know what direction they need to go on in order to do college and career, right? They learn about careers, learn about colleges. The content is not quite there. So I guess the question is, on the student side, and based on, the algorithms, how can students tap into some of this content that, I mean, content is there, it's not put by higher education, but the content is there about jobs, the content is there about colleges. So they can really get a better sense of what to expect. And we talk a lot about raising aspiration, right? So we don't always have the opportunity to bring students to a college, depending on where we are, if we're in rural, even in urban settings, right? We don't always have the capacity to bring different careers into the school, even though we as an organization need to do that. So how can they leverage this content that's on the different platform? And maybe if you can talk about it from the different modes, right? So whether it be LinkedIn, whether it be Facebook, Twitter, can you chime in a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, always like to take a step back from like how to use platforms. But I think one of the most important things that you're touching on, it's so weird, our format feels like it's like more of a presentation than a conversation, so I'm like moving around. But listen, I think that it's not a far reach to say that we are all influencers and we are all representing a personal brand, right? So think about yourself, maybe not yourself, but your students, as the 77% here. You are creators. And if you are a creator, what are you creating? And that's where I think this intersects really well. What you're creating content about yourself that one represents you well. Think of it as wearing a nice suit to an interview. So you have total control over that 100% of the time. And I think that we're in a world where being human and being imperfect is good for social media, but you don't have to be like a mess to get engagement. So as creators, if we're building content for ourselves, we're thinking of ourselves as a brand. I think it's just a healthy piece of exercise to go through what is the brand that you want to create. And go to the next one.
Okay.
We know that leading with purpose is important, right? So if you're coming out of college, what are you going to do as your job? Okay, well, maybe I create content around that piece. Now, once I'm creating content around that category, business, that lifestyle, that passion, that purpose, I also know that I'm going to be served, back to the algorithm, I'm going to be served information about that as well. And I'm going to be connected to people who want to consume about that category and about that purpose and about that passion. So all you got to do is just start creating. If you center yourself and you turn yourself into a brand, you're going to be receiving good and bad, right? The stuff that you're putting out into the world. It's an exact model of what you want to be in the best way. Sometimes the worst way, but we're not talking about that right now.
As one of my colleagues says to her daughters, just don't get pictures of yourself with a solo cup in your hand. So this is, I mean, when we get into career, my background has been working in the corporate world for many years in corporate learning and in HR right now, I mean, it's, LinkedIn, look at people's LinkedIn profile. Before we hire someone, we go on their Facebook pages. We go, I mean, we want to see where they're at. I got an email at like 11 o'clock at night about an employee. Do you know that your employee is on Facebook doing some bad stuff? And I mean, that's the world we're gonna live in now. And I'm like, and then the guy said, well, maybe it's because I got all flamed into an argument with him, and maybe I really shouldn't have contacted. Is what he said to me on the phone. I'm like, yeah, you shouldn't have contacted me. It was like 11 o'clock at night phone call. Because when I got this email, I'm like, oh, we work with colleges. Colleges are super sensitive about people's behavior. And I called him right away, and it was, the guy was in the middle of a social media like clash about I'll call it ideas, but I won't say it ideology. And then the guy went and told him, went and told his boss, and he's right. He's not someone that I want working with us, but that's, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that starts to get escalated. There's people, I mean, when you talk about brand. Your brand is out there, and there's a great NPR. I don't remember it was a few episodes 2 years ago people who got, unadmitted to Harvard because of memes that they were doing. That's absolutely happening now. College admissions with some schools, and I know what Rick was saying over there. There's a college for everybody. There absolutely is. And then there's the world's view of college, which is like 250 colleges out of 5,000. That's not most colleges. Most colleges, the acceptance rates are over 50% or over 40%. You can get into a lot of schools. And a lot of those schools can be great if you take advantage of it. And then there's a whole bunch of schools, 250 or so, that have under 15% or under 14% admission rate that are really hard to get into. And it's really hard to get into that. And so any one of these brand sort of blemishes that come up in the admissions process could be impactful. So what gets you likes or clicks on social media may not be the thing that's going to get you into college or get you a job. And that's a I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it has potential negative consequences if you use it, irresponsibly. But it also has huge positive consequences if you were to use it responsibly, right? And so I think like I said, I think that it's where we are, right? The world is receiving both people and brands on social media and making their own, judgments based on those representations, right? So I think the fastest way and the most impactful way to get yourself into a different community, a potential, if we're talking about career readiness, a community that you want to be working in, if you're looking for mentorship, if you're looking for information, if you're looking for content that could, power your journey, it's social media. So the question is not whether you should use it or not, right? The question that is automatic. We should be using this. It is cognitive richness. It is layered conversations. It is collaboration. It's a way for us to connect with students, communities, networks, mentors, professionals, right? Like there's no question about the need for it. It's just about how do we reel that in and make it a really positive experience, both for our career and for the people around us.
Thoughts or questions for the group to start before we get on?
So from a education standpoint, public school, what do you recommend as kind of baseline education for social media? How do you propose going about it? What would you prioritize? How do you make it impactful?
I don't think you have to teach it.
Oh.
I think they know it, but stewarding it and having healthy conversations about how to use it is super important. And it's the same way it's getting into your kids. It's the way they choose to communicate. So meeting them where they are to this whole conversation is going to be the goal as a teacher. And I don't know what administrations allow and don't allow from an education perspective, but I will say that they're spending their time there from a cultural relevancy standpoint. Meeting them there is going to give you access to their world. It's going to give you access to them in a way that is they're in control of. Obviously kids are very uncomfortable socially these days. And so meeting them when they're in their free time in their entertainment space and they're calm and ready to learn. Now you're asking them questions like, hey, can you give me an example of something we went over in class today? And you're connecting with them as a teacher. They understand you. You have a dialogue that's outside of the traditional, non-connective format of teaching on a platform that is built for engagement, built for connectivity, built for yes, yeah. So I don't know that that's an answer, but it's just how I think about it. Right?
So the most important thing is discernment. Teaching discernment, the ability to discern whether something is real or not. I had an incident as the head of a company trying to figure out how to deal with COVID. Go figure. Probably one of the hardest things that I've ever had to deal with the company, right? And I went and forwarded on this information that I had checked at least 2 or 3 times, checked it out with some other colleagues, and it was not true. And it was something that had been perpetuated about, I don't even remember what it was, Kirsten, but it was something that was something, it wasn't, washing your groceries or something like that, but it was something related to the workplace and COVID, and I was trying to share it as a positive, and then one of my colleagues sent an email back saying, yeah, this isn't true. And also the murdering clowns are not true either. And so, if any of you remember that, so we have a son who actually created a little stick to protect our house from the clown killers. So understanding how to discern what's real and not real, I think is one of the most important things to, and I think it's getting very, very difficult to do that. As the algorithms that Josh is talking about they work. And I used to work at a company where we used to talk about explicit and implicit profiles. The explicit profile is what you tell Facebook you are and who you are. The implicit is what you're actually doing. And what you're doing is by far way more accurate than what you say you are in the profile. And there's so much data out there. When we look at traffic on the website or people's behavior website, that's what we're more interested in rather than what they say they're interested in. Based on what they're actually clicking on, that is the indication of their interest. Way more than saying, I'm interested in engineering. And then they spend all their time looking at athletics. For instance, we did a program for Berkeley. International students coming to the United States, and based on web traffic, this was a group post-grad, but they would spend so much time on life in California, life on Berkeley, life in San Francisco Bay Area. So we started sending advertising around, Gold Gate Bridge and cool pictures of California, because that's what people were implicitly interested in. That's what they were clicking. Good question.
Wow, you guys are raising a lot of great points about meeting people where they are and leveraging that. So I guess first I'm wondering with a particular school, would you suggest doing surveys to find out which social medias the particular students are using? Or is it just, as you presented, that there are a certain number of top platforms, like for an individual educator in the school, like meeting them where they are, you first have to know like what they're using in order to meet them there. So how would you propose that be done?
Yeah, well, yes. So one, they use all platforms, okay, just to be clear. Most people overlap on all of these platforms. Okay. But Instagram is obviously going to be the largest broad-reaching platform that people use right now. We're talking about Gen Z. The steepest hockey stick is with TikTok, but it's still a much smaller audience. But I don't think it's not really about where your students are because they're on all of them. It's more about what is going to be best for you to control the conversation and to connect and collaborate. And that includes LinkedIn. Like students are it's a communication style. It's a language. Posting and receiving feedback, right? What you're putting out in the world is what you're attracting. That is communication style. And so any of those platforms work with that as long as you can. Obviously, as a teacher's perspective, you just want to create safe boundaries for what that communication can be, what it should be. When I looked at, I'm sorry.
I was committed to my school, and I have 3 platforms. I do Facebook for parents, Instagram for kids, and Twitter for community members. That's a lot of work. Because I'm able to hit every single area that needs to. Parents are all on Facebook.
I think that's great. I think that's great, especially if there's a learned experience there and expectation from the school. We can talk about kind of best practices for each platform and what they're technically used for. There's a lot of art to the algorithms and to how they structure them. For example, short form videos, as you've seen, Reels and TikTok are highly built and they're promoted by Facebook's, Instagram, and TikTok's algorithm to reach broad new audiences. But they're lesser impactful when it comes to engagement. So the traditional post is going to generate more conversation, more likes, more shares. Whereas the Reels platform, short form video is just trying to reach a lot. And so depending on what you're posting or depending on what the topic is, like there's a tool for you. And that's kind of how I conceptualize it. It's more like it's a multi-tool, you know, it's a Swiss Army knife for communication.
You get on fire and then trash. Not posting the same thing on Instagram, they're gonna know, and then you don't make them care.
Yeah, and if you ask them to find another example of something that connects with that, well, then they're gonna go out searching for it. And think about the implications of when they're searching for things, now what they're receiving back. That's the transformative experience for me, is like understanding that if I get these kids to spend more time looking for stuff on STEM, then they're gonna be served it, they're gonna be interested in it, right? And it's a vortex of information that could be positive if we use it in productive ways.
Have you had anything blow up on Facebook in terms of comments?
You know, that was saying. It's the next thing that could comment. We had a conversation with school, principals came out and said, this is for you guys. And when you post their comments, we're going to have to, the leaders, we're gonna turn off the comments and like use it appropriately. And with after those conversations, it's off. Everybody can put it back up. And
I meant more with the parents, actually.
Media, and then share it, and then, you know, also it goes from views to like 250 views within 20 minutes. Oh, it's huge here.
Make a comment too, that's a great example.
Yeah.
We as obviously schools and organizations, we talk a lot about how do we reach and connect with the families. And that's a great example of how it doesn't take too much in terms of effort and planning to do that communication. There are 4 or 5 other tools that you can probably use within your school community, but that seems to work in that environment. So remember that, that some of these are going to connect with others better than based on their context. So that's really important, but especially the family engagement when it comes to social media and how it can be leveraged.
So this is an example, and actually this together is back there, thanks Kirsten. So this is what we are looking at for this college. So this is an example of some of that data that Josh was talking about, those algorithms, where we're looking at, you know, costs per enrollment. We're looking at all the different, these are all the different lead sources, which is paid social, website, paid search, and so on. And then it goes in further into social, around the different social channels about where things come from. And this is, the idea of this is to determine, you know, what's the most cost-effective way to get the students that a school wants. That is absolutely how schools are looking at their marketing. And they're going to be looking at using social channels, try and connect up with students and families where they are. I will say that there's a big disconnect in terms of what they're willing to do. So we've tried to run Facebook pages on behalf of schools, for instance. That's fine, but you can't have any comments on the page. That's not social.
Yeah.
That's publishing, right? And so there's a real disconnect. Schools are, colleges, when I say schools, are fairly risk averse. And so they're not interested. They're interested in alumni, donations, development, advancement, whatever euphemism you want to use now. And they're interested in incoming freshmen and also incoming students for other programs. And they are incredibly risk averse. So when I work with a school for the first time, I've heard this at least 3 times. We'd love you to grow enrollments, but first and foremost, do no harm. That's the message. Do no harm. Because we've worked with a lot of special grants. Some of the very schools you would know, like, Northeast, Tufts and Clark and Harvard and Brown and Boston University. I mean, these are schools that are super, super careful with their grants. Just in the Northeast here. And then some of these schools are not as concerned about that. We work with a school in the main area, Unity College, who's like, hey, let's go for it. Let's connect with people, as Josh is saying, where they're at. Because that's really what's going to work in the long run. And the reason being, they have a super innovative president who's like, hey, we're trying to get students from this, I'll just say, this century, the people who are actually out there, rather than we want to protect our brand and we're going to create a very narrow gate in order how to get in. So it really depends on the school in terms of how they're going to communicate. I know I'm talking about it from the college standpoint, but from how the student shows up, I'd say the same thing. Be careful. Do no harm. It's be careful in terms of your brand. I think it is about your brand, what your brand wants to be. But what Josh is saying about content creation, that is what schools are looking for. Schools are looking for people who are going to add to the community. And one of the ways to show that you can add to the community is how you publish content. And so if your brand shows that you bring more value, I mean, it's not, I don't necessarily mean it's followers or likes, but if you're publishing interesting content or demonstrating that you're thinking about things, or you've gone and interviewed people, or you've done short videos or other kinds of media, that's a great way to build your brand and show that you have something to add to the school's community. That's a big driver in college admissions. Is what you're going to add to their community.
It's also, I'll add to that, I think that's a great point. I also think it's leadership. I think it's actually kind of bold to write something up on social platforms that, may not be so personal, but like almost career related, or like put out commentary on like an article that you read. Those are bold things that are meant to be shared. And so I think you are teaching leadership in that capacity as well. So when the school is looking at your social profile, you have a bunch of really well thought out analytical responses to editorial, to video content, or whatever. I think that has the potential to speak positively about you as a agency. And I also think that brands, I think that schools, it's interesting you brought up that schools are sort of sensitive to content. Most brands are really sensitive to social responses as well. They control them as much as possible, but they're not. They don't do that when it comes to like football teams, right, and some of the, so there's things really interesting how we choose to like segment our lives rather than be, really complex brands, people, teams.
That has become a very challenging and important job for a lot of schools, is the athletic PR person. Is it really, it used to just be putting together a brochure, once every couple of weeks and sending it out to people. Now it's got to be a very serious job. Other questions?
I also handle my students, and I've been really, right now we use considering the word, can you get the students to buy it? How they go about it? You do have the kind of that's very little table pictures of that. And then it's just like, that is probably much. Yeah, and they love it's like mom day more. So I just, for me, I need students to try to make them together, so that's what they're but I also, work with school, but a lot of times, all over and makes it be, they'll do a science fair class. Pretty much every day about every other day. And like we have probably I personally just have 3 different times, and I like saying moving videos and all kinds of stuff. Yes, on district absolutely. And then the rule. So like the district has access to it as well. I have to do. It's making also like down in the district, when they have, we can first report, we had a birthday, they got all our social media. Things. All that, school opening. The district is very much. Specific. Yeah, I mean, we've got time and money. I mean, really, and I think argues now had that on the feedback is usually positive.
Isn't that a great model of actually the classroom too? There's bad comments as well sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
What do you do with that? Have a side conversation about it.
So one of the power of social media is leveraging the exponential connections. So one of the things we did for a school, UNC Chapel Hill, was take students who've been through a program and have them create an ad about the program, and then do a, can't say March Madness, we did this, not being recorded, is it? So a bracket, excuse me, not a March Madness bracket. But it was in March and it was at UNC Chapel Hill, so just saying bracket, everyone knew what we were talking about. And then their job was to go get as many likes to their ad to see if they can get to the next bracket and the next bracket. And so what that did for us is it generated, 32 pieces of content that we didn't have to create. And it got distributed to a ton of people that we weren't able to reach otherwise. So it was a way of connecting into where the students already were, as Josh is saying, they're there. And giving them almost the reins to then make that, it didn't go viral, but I don't know if you know how to make something go viral. If you do, I'd like to talk.
It was not good for this conversation.
So, but get it out there to a broader audience. So I would encourage you to think about how do you tap into, that kind of, that kind of distribution, that kind of sharing. So.
I have a quick question about kind of the idea you brought up, the boldness of creating content, sharing with sharing perspective as a student, and how that would make a young person a more attractive candidate than a member of the community at college, for instance. And I wonder between the bold creation of student content and becoming a member of one of these communities, like as a kid, right, that they keep making content and hope that, like we were talking about, somebody looks into what they've done. If you were to kind of give us your advice to share with the other person, all right, you're making content, you're snapping videos, find what you care about. How would you, where we're at today, suggest a student who does those things find a way to market themselves and they've built to make sure that a college or an admissions counselor sees those things as opposed to kind of using in the world and assuming these?
That's a great question. When I was thinking through this talk, I didn't think about it from like a career admissions person. I was thinking about more like career, actual career, like sure get into physics.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's really easy. You can probably answer this better, but from a targeting perspective, it's probably really easy to check off the box. Admissions people on Facebook back then, run an ad. I don't suggest kids do that, but that's what we do. That's a really good question. I don't know the answer for that. I have a bunch of takeaways and best practices for that student. The best thing I would say is that like if there's an opportunity for that admissions person to look at this CV of this kid and figure out whether they should be at their school, well, that admissions person is going to look at their social profiles, and then they're going to be reading, what content they're going to post. I just don't know how it would work out. So
Yeah.
conversation. Sorry.
No.
kind of cracks me up, because in the early nineties, I was in Rochester, New York, which used to have a company called Kodak. Before that company before it imploded. And we were working on a task force to do, at that time, what was called authentic assessment. The idea of authentically assessing a student's portfolio. Kodak had distributed, the very large S, digital cameras, which were a really big thing. And CD-ROM burners, with the idea that from kindergarten to 12th grade would be capturing rich media of people's authentic assessment with the intention, this was the intention at the time, of going to college and admissions and saying, here it is, K through 12. And being able to show someone authentically how you've grown over time. That was the vision that Kodak had working with the school districts at the time. And it just made me think, like, if we really haven't quite gotten there, we really haven't, and it's still very random. We've got 3 kids that just gone through the admissions process, and it's when I used to read admissions applications back in the 80s, and I'd get 100 folders and have to read them all, and every week I got a new 100 folders, and I have to sort them out and rank them, and it ain't a lot different now. It's still the same process. Now, they may not be using paper the same way I literally had these, whatever file boxes that we would take home with us. But I think it's the same kind of process. And what's in the folders now is a little different. But they're not out searching for what's going on social media to determine admissions officer. But if somebody got flagged, it's like only in the bad case does it make it, unless you make it part of your, this is something I want to share with you, which other Common App has that. It has an opportunity for you to share, and in certain kinds of majors, like if you're a design major at a certain school, they'll want to see a portfolio or something like that. But there's not really a lot of avenues. The same way when I get a resume and someone wants to send like their picture or their other, like, looking at a resume. So,
Old way to do it. I think it depends on if you want a specific school, if you want to just do a bunch of schools. But say you post something really thoughtful, and write something, and your project is really special. You add all of the different colleges and hashtag admissions downstairs. And I'm positive that you'll get a response there, and I'm positive in that community response, you'll be able to figure out who these admission people are, and then that's what we do this for. And there's a quick email, yeah, there's definitely, there's a way you can move on to that one. That's awesome.
Some other questions, comments? Yeah.
So I am about any like referral, I guess, or college or schools that have already done this and are really
At the high school level? I know Otis College in California is doing some interesting things. Because again, it's an art school, so that's part of their deal. I don't know school districts as an example. I'd ask the group here.
I think this is a great example. For that, I don't know your thing.
Haley. So, yeah, I just, it's not this school. Anytime I'm having that new it all goes into the. And I have the snack. Yeah. The whole member, it's all of them lead to other, to person. So see it. Oh, I'm telling you, please start there. Okay. Yeah. And so it leads to this. That, I did every time. Each career. Students see that they might not all. That, they can all see. Just also in the university. And it's college, and then much worse. Technologists, made them up.
Happened to your students too. I mean, our daughter, when she was in high school, did the social media for the student union of the school. I mean, they asked her to, you know, tap into your students as well. So from a career standpoint, careers are definitely moving in the more social media, but it's still, LinkedIn is still a pretty significant pathway, and that's something that we tell students. And I work with a bunch of different headhunters to try and hire people, and one of them is a good friend of mine, and you know, he said, you know, when he's working with candidates, that's the first thing that they tell him to do is make sure your LinkedIn is current, make sure it you know shows as you as best as possible, make sure that there's no gaps. The way LinkedIn works, it's very hard to give them all your accurate stuff, especially if you have current dates, other work experience and so forth, but make sure your LinkedIn is a really good representation, because to be sure, from a career standpoint, if you're applying for a job, that you're gonna be, you know, your LinkedIn page is gonna review at least once as a quick survey to see if someone's real or not real. So, and then in addition to LinkedIn, we talked about it in the essential skills group, but networking, and one of the things I talk to students about is as well, if you're going to network, someone is not going to go home after meeting you, or someone is not going to read whatever it is you've tried to do on a social platform and then spend the next week thinking, how can I help Betty? You know, I wonder how I can help John. It's in that moment, can they do something or not? And so having a really clean ask is important when you're networking. So having a clean ask saying, I'm looking for X, and giving someone the ability to then pass on, whether it's a resume, whether it's another ask, if it's passing it on to someone else, saying, if you know anyone who's looking for this, please send them my, and whatever it is you're trying to pass on. So networking is a really, really important tool. Is one of the essential skills that's talked about here for sure, but it's something that people don't know how to do very well. And so if I go up to someone and say, oh, it's really, we can have a great conversation, but if I don't ask for that next action, that's the end of it. And so encouraging people to figure out what their ask is before they start posting and asking people to share that. That'll be another essential skill connection. So
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think needs to be an action item at that point. Just from a comfortability standpoint, the community is used to DMing people and talking to people that they don't know. And the goal is this is an audience that is comfortable reaching out to people because they're in their own setting and they're in control of the narrative. Right. So having them do that with an action is the real one, right? And why am I doing that? Who am I reaching out to? How is that shaping my future? We got a few, I don't know, if you guys are interested in kind of content takeaways, how to create best practices, or how to create best content. I can give those to you with that. I mean, these are largely formatted for brands, so just kind of reformatted for individual people who are making themselves clear in it. One, go to audiences you don't know about. You don't talk much about that because that's more brand and brand awareness. Go to the next. This is the wrong one. So formats. The strongest posts have the most impactful first frame. So leading with an impact leading with what you're trying to give the audience. It's important. Don't just start it at the beginning of the video. Captions and context really help. So if you could tell somebody what you're about to look at with a header, that's super impactful because it leads to engagement. And people don't have any patience for unformatted content. So just know that, go make sure it's mobile ready. If you're trying to reach, millennial or Gen Z audiences. Strong short form videos that jump right into action. I'm gonna skip all this and just leave you with focus on quality, not quantity. It's not about being on all the time. It's about, finding like really positive moments. People love purpose, people love passion, they love something that is going to touch their heartstrings. So save posting for those moments where people look their best. Skip all those relationship ones.
So I like that part about leaks and behind the scenes sneak peeks work well.
Which you're,
I'm thinking about just with the schools or
Oh, yeah,
let's say,
good
people
point.
in
you're
pathways.
right.
So-
I was contextualizing that as like red carpet stuff, but you're right. All the work that goes into what you do is really important because people often think that like teaching is easy, right? So the legwork or, the studying, the hard work by students, the creation of a project, the slow-mo of doing things. This, I think, is really important, focus on the human elements, showcase human moments. Again, that's because we can relate, we can connect, we can see ourselves in other people's content, skip categories. I'll add to this. Human is good, perfect is not recommended.
On that, human is good, perfect is not recommended, so. We post a lot of video for schools. People don't trust the perfectly, made videos. The thing that works, I don't know if I have it. So we do a lot with international and posting videos of students from, this is an important slide, I'll come back to that in a second, but the posting videos of students like you. So students from Brazil talking about their experience at a school is much more impactful than the fancy glossy video, which is, spent $100,000 to put a 15-minute video together. And so just simple, authentic videos are really catch people's attention. Go actually back to that other slide that shows it.
One thing.
Look at the ghost one here. This one here. So this is how a school looks at marketing. It's not just schools, but looks at marketing to and recruiting students. Not as much for the incoming freshman, but more for an adult student. But almost half of all students are not giving their lead information. So they're going straight to application, or they're going straight to actual enrollment. It's a non-better program. And so all of these students who are in this pathway, we know who they are. We don't know their names, but we know their IP addresses. And we engage with them constantly as who they show that they are by what they click on. And as Josh was saying, this can be a positive and a negative, but as you start to see people clicking on certain things, and this is if you're actually publishing content yourself and managing your website, starting to see what channels people are using. So finding out how many people are using, I like the concept of freedom from choice in some ways, because if you restrict how information gets out, in your example, like the way you get the information about the sports scores is on Twitter. Like you can't get an up-to-date score on the high school sports unless you're on Twitter. Or for parents, that this is the information about what's going on, it's on Facebook. It's not anywhere else. You're not sending out a broadcast email. So understanding how people are actually behaving on the site, social media can have a huge impact in terms of how people view what they're doing. And so if you can connect other people who are behaving in the same way, lookalikes, with others who are also behaving in the same way, they can encourage each other. And again, this is putting it out, you can't control it as much, but putting people together that weren't together before on an interested page or an interested media platform. Well, I will be here to talk about, if you'd like to, on the college path. If anyone would like to talk about that in terms of how schools are engaging. If you're all day today. So Josh knows more about social media than anyone I've met, so. Thank you, and we'll be around all evening, so thanks.
Thank you.